Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Well, Fridays are usually a big day, and today is no exception. So we are going to talk about the indictment of Jim Comey that dropped last night. We have an enormous number of other things to cover that have happened between yesterday and this morning. And I will just tell you that if you are feeling overwhelmed right now by all of this terribly bad news and scary news, you are not alone. It's very common. I personally have had my moment of, really being done with this timeline. And yet there is no way out but through. So we're going to cover all of that today. If you happen to be watching on YouTube, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing an oatmeal colored sweater. My hair is pulled back. I am a pink skinned, green eyed, dirty blonde haired woman. I have a pair of small earrings in today. And I am coming to you as always from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. So for those who missed the saga, here's how this all went down. In the Eastern District of Virginia, where, as I discussed yesterday, I used to practice, there was a situation last week where the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia resigned because Trump was insisting that he indict Jim Comey. Trump then appointed another one of his own personal lawyers, somebody who has never been a prosecutor, to that position. And within 2 days, even though it took two grand juries, she managed to get an indictment of Jim Comey on 2 out of 3 counts concerning some testimony that he gave to Congress about whether or not he had told Andy McCabe that it was okay to leak information about the Russia investigation to the press. I have to point out that the only person who signed this indictment from that office is Trump's appointee, that Jim Comey's son-in-law, who was an attorney in that office, quit immediately upon the indictment, and that from inside the Department of Justice, all the sources that are speaking to the press are saying that this is an unprecedented abuse of power. Now, this brand new U.S. attorney has walked herself into 2 very difficult situations. The first is that there doesn't appear to be an actual prosecutor, anyone with any experience, in the Eastern District of Virginia's U.S. Attorney's Office willing to try this case. Because frankly, as was previously recommended by all the prosecutorial staff, this case does not hold water. It's not a case that is going to earn a conviction. That's the first problem. The second problem is that apparently this brand new U.S. attorney lied to the judge by submitting 2 totally different pieces of paper, one indictment that had been rejected, another one that had not been, signing the original, which is not what's supposed to happen, and presenting it all to the judge as if it was a done deal. The other thing that I just have to mention, in addition to those 2 factors that are now running very much against this case, is that they have pulled a judge. Again, I will remind everybody that in federal court, judicial assignments to cases are random. They have pulled a judge who is a Biden appointee who used to be a criminal public defender. This is someone who actually has represented terrorists in the past. This is a judge that is known for being very fair and very even-keeled, but nonetheless, very justice-oriented. And all the indications are that this is not a case that any other prosecutor thought could be effectively made out. Now, I'd say a couple of things about this because there's a number of possible outcomes here. The first outcome is that the case gets kicked out of court by the judge for lack of probable cause. Okay. And you need, by the way, the Justice Department manual says that you need way more than probable cause to indict someone. You actually need proof beyond a reasonable doubt that a prosecutor should not proceed with a case without proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which they absolutely do not have here. Okay. So that's one factor. Second possibility is that this is a situation where the DOJ realizes that because this particular brand new, totally inexperienced U.S. attorney cannot find a prosecutor to actually prosecute the case gets dropped. The third possibility here, which is the one that would be the most kind of dirt on the face option is that the case goes to a jury and Jim Comey is acquitted. Now, I'm going to remind everybody, because there were some comments on my feed on Blue Sky yesterday that seemed to not indicate this. If you are acquitted, double jeopardy applies and there is no right of appeal. Okay, so that is a situation in which Jim Comey walks away scot-free. Now, the sentencing recommendations for these claims, which concern like the claim that he lied to Congress and the claim that he obstructed Congress, carry a sentencing recommendation of between 0 to 6 months. So it's highly unlikely that even if he were to be found guilty, Jim Comey is going to do time. This is a claim, by the way, that often would not even result in a prosecution. All that said, I have to point out something very specific here, because there were some comments on the Patreon feed and also on Blue Sky last night on my Blue Sky that really seemed to miss the point of this. All right. And so I want to make it really clear to you from a political and a strategic standpoint why it is that you really should care very deeply about this level of corruption inside the Department of Justice. Okay, there's a lot of us here who are not fans of Jim Comey. I'm one of them, okay? I think, and I said this at the time, that he had violated the DOJ handbook when he talked about reopen a case into Hillary Clinton like 2 weeks before the 2016 election. No question that that was improper, all right? That is something that ordinarily would be dealt with by DOJ brass, okay? All that said, whatever your personal feelings happen to be about Jim Comey, you should be appalled by the Department of Justice taking an order from a president to indict someone who he perceives as a political enemy. Why? Because if they do it to Jim Comey, they will do it to anyone. And so this is not just about, like, people yesterday were like, this is Jim Comey's karma. No, it's not. I mean, this is an indication of corruption at the highest levels of government. Like, I'm not joking around with the title for today's video. This is Trump's most brazen act of corruption yet. And we all have to kind of, let me just point out one other thing here. The reason why they picked Jim Comey first is because they are assuming that people on our side of the fence are going to give this a pass because we don't like what Jim Comey did in the 2016 election. So that when they come for Kamala Harris, or they come for Rachel Maddow, or they come for Eric Swalwell or Jamie Raskin, all of us are going to be like, oh, well, I guess that's the normal now because he did it to Comey. That's what they are expecting. So whatever your personal thoughts are about any of this, you should be opposed to what the DOJ has done here, because it is the weaponization of the most powerful judicial arm of the government for a revenge tour for the president without any evidence. This is the per se definition of a show trial. We're like at the show trial stage of fascism now, okay? So you have to sit back from like, oh, I don't like Jim Comey, or Jim Comey screwed us, or we ended up with Trump because of Jim Comey. That doesn't matter, okay? That has absolutely no relevance to the per se corrupt weaponization of the Department of Justice to prosecute the president's political enemy. So all of this, I have to be really blunt about it, because they are counting on people like us to say, oh, well, it's Jim Comey. I hate him. I don't care what happens to him. Let him go broke. Trump can put him in prison. Who gives a shit? I'm not going to worry about it. That's what they want. Because if we give him a pass to do this, the next time, it's going to be somebody that you really care about. And they will have set a precedent with Comey that we won't be able to come back from. So you have to look at this through the lens of the absolute corrupt misdeed that it is, and stand up for the principle that the DOJ should not be used to persecute political enemies, even when you don't like the people that they're persecuting, right? Because, as I said, next time it's going to be somebody that you love. So I want everybody to kind of get their heads screwed on straight about this, because this is a political act. It's a political act. It is not about Jim Comey, the man. It is not about Jim Comey, the interferer in the 2016 election. It's about the persecution of political enemies of the president by the Department of Justice. That's what it's about. Okay. So I want you to think about what happens when they steamroll into Tim Walz's office and slap the handcuffs on him and accuse him of a crime, because that's possible if we let this slide. Okay. Everybody clear on that? Please. Like because I'll tell you, I got really frustrated and even deleted some comments on the Patreon last night about this, because we have to be really clear-headed about this, like really clear-headed. Like, don't let this one get a pass just because you don't like the guy. The other thing I got this morning on the Patreon feed was a question about what Comey can say at trial. So I have to remind everybody that there's this thing called the Federal Rules of Evidence. And the Federal Rules of Evidence require that all the evidence that is admitted at a trial is, before anything else, because there are lots of other rules that apply, relevant, okay? So this is not a situation where Jim Comey is going to be able to come in and dump everything terrible that he knows about Donald Trump into a court of law. He can't do that. And, you know, the prosecution itself will really be very tightly contained by this judge to the facts surrounding the allegations against him. So nobody should be seeing this as an opportunity for Comey to just like spew everything he knows about Trump, Epstein files or not, or anything else. He's not going to be allowed to do that. All right. This is really a persecution. That is what it is. It is a purposeful targeting of someone perceived to be one of Trump's political enemies, going all the way back to the Russia scandal. All right. So, you know, I'm not sure this one is going to hold a lot of water for much longer, by the way. Like, my gut is telling me that this isn't going to last, but we will have to see what the next developments are. Okay. In other very scary news, Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense / Fox News host, rapist, alcoholic, has called a meeting of all the senior military staff in the greater DC area for next week. This is absolutely unprecedented. There is apparently no known historical precedent for literally calling in like all your generals from the Middle East and Asia Pacific and Europe and everywhere else to come to one big meeting in front of the Secretary of Defense. Now, this morning, the reporting was that this is not a top secret event. It is given like a secret designation, but not like the highest level of security clearance. So that has led to some speculation that maybe this is just about, I don't know, a loyalty oath to Donald Trump. Maybe it's about purging people from the military who they don't like. Maybe it's about Venezuela. There's been some speculation about that. But nobody really knows at this point what's going on. What I will say is that all the people who know about this sort of thing, many of whom have been interviewed now, like former senior military officials, have said that this actually puts the United States in a very dangerous position, because when all your senior military officials aren't out in the field where they're supposed to be, it sends a message to your enemies that it's a good moment to attack. So, you know, this is, it raises really huge questions about what's going on. And, you know, there was a very strange post from Pete Hegseth this morning, apparently on X, where somebody had posted like Hitler pulled all his generals together and said that the oath that they had taken to the Weimar Republic was no longer legitimate and they had to swear an oath to the Fuhrer. And Hegseth responded literally, "Cool story, bro." So who knows what that means? You know, we can read into the tea leaves of that or not. I will just say that I have my eyes on that. And I also don't want people to panic, because it could be something as simple as Pete Hegseth wanting to show up and be like, rah, rah, USA, right? We don't know. We just don't know. All right. This morning at the United Nations, Benjamin Netanyahu was scheduled to speak. There was a mass walkout at the UN when he took the dais. I'm not surprised by this. I'm actually surprised that it didn't happen to Trump in the same way. But Netanyahu ended up speaking to a mostly empty room today. And that tells us all something about how the international tables have turned on the genocide in Gaza. Again, something to keep an eye on because of the way in which Trump and Netanyahu have been in bed together. And this is a good moment to just point out to everyone, because there was some commentary about this last night on Blue Sky that is very relevant, that when political movements start to fall below like 30% approval, they start to disintegrate. And that includes like far right or fascist movements worldwide. I talked yesterday about the fact that we now have some new polling that indicates that on some issues, Trump is now below 30%. And when you line that up with the mass worldwide opposition to the genocide in Gaza, Trump's allegiances to Bibi Netanyahu, his statements about what he wants to do to Gaza, Even though, of course, like everything else, similarly to Ukraine, he wavers back and forth depending on which way the wind blows and who's going to give him the most attention. I will just point out that all of that is crumbling before our eyes. Netanyahu, I think, is not long for leadership. And that is one reason why he is attempting to literally wipe out every single person in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. I am pleased, at the very least, to see this happening. And you know, we'll have to see what comes of it next. But it's a huge statement that at the UN, he was basically speaking to an empty room. And I will just tell you, for those of you who haven't seen the footage, it's all over social media. You can go find it. Okay, we had some questions about the EO that was signed last night on counterterrorism and political violence. So we knew that this was coming. It's very similar, by the way, to the like Antifa order that was signed 2 nights ago, where basically they are using the shooting in Dallas, Texas, and Charlie Kirk's murder as a Reichstag moment to weaponize the federal government about anybody that they think they don't like, that has said anything in opposition to the federal government. So preview, over on the Ripple Effect Institute channel, we have a video coming on Monday about how to be brave under fascism. Because one of the questions that came up this morning on the Patreon feed concerned fear among immigration rights organizations, for instance, that they are now going to be targeted. Well, I will just, you know, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I've been talking for weeks about the fact that Indivisible is probably going to be targeted by this administration. Move On is probably going to be targeted by this administration. They've now essentially said, Stephen Miller has more or less explicitly said that his aim right now is to take down the entire Democratic Party. But I have to point something out to all of you, okay? If you have a 30% approval rating, that means 70% of the country doesn't agree with what you're doing. And they can't round up and incarcerate 70% of the United States of America. They simply don't have the manpower to do it. They're already meeting immediate resistance in the streets with their efforts concerning ICE. You know, there's footage this morning of an ICE officer pointing a gun at a crowd while they were detaining someone who was a U.S. citizen. Like, they are not in good shape right now from this standpoint. So a lot of this is threat. And you have to ask yourself a legitimate question about whether or not you think they're actually going to be able to carry it out. Now, does that mean that organizations that you're a part of shouldn't be doing safety planning? No, of course not. Of course they should be doing safety planning. And I will remind you all that there is an organization called the Progressive Safety Alliance that will do free consultations with any organization about how to stay safe during this era. And it also has an enormous number of resources on their website for you to do your own organizational evaluations about this, okay? But I do think it's really important for people to not overestimate the threat against them personally, all right? And there's more in this video that's coming up on Monday morning. You can watch it all, but I have to say this, okay? You have to do a very specific analysis for yourself about whether or not you are directly under threat right now, because the vast majority of white Americans are not on the immediate target list, okay? If you are trans, if you are disabled, if you are queer, yes, of course, there may be a threat to your participation in social justice action. There's nothing different about that. If you are brown or black, your risk is significantly higher than the rest of us, right? But the vast majority of white America that is like on our side of the fence tends to overreact to these things. And I have to just say something about that because I feel very strongly about this. People who cannot speak out right now are counting on us to stay loud. And there is a critical importance at this moment that we do not allow ourselves to be intimidated into silence. So yes, organizational safety matters. Yes, living under a fascist oppressive regime carries risks for everyone, but those risks are relative. And it is incredibly important that when you hear them making threats, you see them through the lens of your own relative privilege and you make decisions accordingly, okay? Because they're doing this, I'm quoting from my video on Monday, you guys are all getting a preview. They're doing this so you will police yourself so that they do not have to police you, okay? And so I want to encourage everyone who is a part of an organization to do that risk analysis because it's really important. And simultaneously, I want you to really check yourself, if you happen to be a person of relative privilege, about whether or not you will capitulate to their intimidation. It is a moment to not stay silent because they cannot arrest all of us. And the vast majority of us are very seriously opposed to what they're doing. All right. So that's my sense on that at the moment. All right. Okay. I had a question about what's happening with the Everglades concentration camp. So there is news about this that has not really broken into the mainstream media yet that we have to talk about. Many of you will recall that there was an order that came out of a court in Florida shutting down the Everglades concentration camp because of environmental issues. Notwithstanding that, they continued to operate. Well, now there is a situation that has developed where 2/3 of the people who were being held at the Everglades concentration camp, many of whom were never accused of a crime, some of whom are U.S. citizens, have disappeared. Up to 800 people have vanished from the rolls of the INS. Meaning that, like many of you may not know this, there's a database where you can search for your detainee by their A number. These people have just simply disappeared from the database altogether. There are huge questions about what's happened to these people. Their families cannot contact them and cannot find out where, like, have no idea where they are. And the only organization that seems to be covering this right now is Democracy Now! So Democracy Now! Did like a 12-minute bit of reporting on this. You can go watch it if you would care to. They've spoken to family members of people who have disappeared. But this is something that raises huge questions about what's actually happening to people inside these camps. And I will just add one other thing here. There's new reporting this morning that for the first time ever, the majority of people being held in immigration detention in the United States have been accused of no crime. That, by the way, you know, I know everybody has these debates about is it a concentration camp or not. That's the per se definition of a concentration camp. So all of this right now is something that we need to be focused on in terms of our own resistance and opposition. The other thing you should be aware of is that because the Everglades concentration camp is technically under control of the state of Florida, they have not applied the requirements that the federal courts have insisted on for due process. They have simply picked people up and deported them. And that may be what has happened to those who are missing. So again, go watch the video for Democracy Now! On this if you want to learn more about it, but it needs greater amplification to be sure. Okay. Final bit of insanity for today. Last night, very late, the president, because he felt like it, listed a whole new series of tariffs now on incoming goods to the United States. A 100% tariff on all pharmaceuticals produced by a company that has not broken ground on a production facility in the United States. They are doubling the cost of, literally, this is not a lie, they are doubling the cost of all pharmaceuticals coming into the United States that are made outside of the U.S. This is devastating. I will also tell you that I don't think it's going to stick. Like, I think we're in a taco president situation again. And I can't imagine that this is going to last. All right. But he did it. The other thing that he decided last night in defense of national security is that kitchen cabinets, bathroom cabinets, and upholstered furniture will all have a 50% tariff if they're coming into the United States. I have to say that, again, there's no rhyme or reason to this. It's also like deeply self-sabotaging because many of the people in the Trump base are the kind of people who have the money to throw around to renovate a bathroom. And I cannot imagine that this is going to land well either. But it is literally like he just randomly comes up with an idea and suddenly decides to destroy an aspect of the U.S. economy. I can't explain it. I don't think the pharmaceutical one's going to stick. I'm waiting to see what the story is going to be with, like, why he's punishing IKEA and Pottery Barn, but whatever. And we will have to see what comes next out of that. Okay, final little update. Late last night, the Jeffrey Epstein estate released its third tranche of documents in response to a congressional subpoena. We don't yet know what's in them. I do expect that there is going to be additional breaking news at some point today about what's in those documents, because some of them concern flight logs, apparently, his assistant's records on his appointments, and various other things that could implicate other people. All right. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. The other thing is that Bloomberg is out with another piece this morning. You'll all recall that a couple of weeks ago, they got a hold of 18,000 of Jeffrey Epstein's emails from an old Yahoo account, which for their first piece was about how Ghislaine Maxwell was the intermediary and the recruiter for all of this. All right. This new piece is about finances and the communications between Jeffrey Epstein and financiers to fund his enterprises. So there's, an enormous amount of data and information and records out there that we have yet to see or have reporting on. But I do just want to mention to everybody that we are expecting more from that. All right. It's Friday in Trump land. This week has been hell. I would just, I feel like I do this every Friday. I just want to encourage everybody to get outside and take some deep breaths and take a bit of a break. Do your best to self-regulate during this time. And also, reminder, if you want to support this broadcast, we are still running a 20% off discount on annual subscriptions using the code podcast, because we are back up on podcasting platforms. We had a glitch yesterday on Spotify. Sorry, you guys, but we're fixing it. That had to do with something about our storage. The team behind the scenes is getting that fixed, so don't worry about it. But please, if you do not already support this broadcast, our subscription started as little as $5 a month, 20% off annual subscriptions using that code podcast. That is still up and running. All right. Don't forget to like this broadcast, subscribe wherever you're listening to it, and I will see you all next week at regular time. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good weekend, like as much of a good weekend as you can when we're living through hell, but try. All right, you guys, I'll talk to you soon. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.